As our project, we chose to do the Rube Goldberg. Rube Goldberg was a famous artist, sculptor, and cartoonist, and it was through his cartoons that he proposed these crazy inventions that became what we know as Rube Goldbergs. One of the things that Rube Goldbergs rely heavily on is the concept of conservation of energy, and that basically says that energy must be transferred from one form to another form, but the total energy has to remain the same.
To continue on the conservation of energy, conserved energy means that it remains constant. The energy at the start of the Rube Goldberg will be the same at a later time after it starts. The energy, however, can change form throughout the course, but will always remain the same amount.
The lever was the first simple machine we used. It has the ability to achieve a multiplication of force, but not a multiplication of energy. A lever consists of a fulcrum, a fixed point underneath a rigid bar, the load, or object being moved, and the force applied to one end of the lever. The object to be moved is placed at the end of the lever with the fulcrum somewhere in between. By varying the distance between the force, fulcrum, and load, the amount of effort needed to move the load can be decreased.
The next simple machine we used was an inclined plane used to get an object from the top to the bottom of the stairs. As normal force and gravitational force acted on the object as Santa, his acceleration increased and he was able to kickstart the fall of VHS tapes with a whopping velocity of 2.79 meters per second.
Further on within our Rube Goldberg, we utilized a pulley. A pulley can multiply force and change its direction. On one end of the pulley is the input and on the other is the output. Using a single pulley in a frictionless world results in a 1-to-1 input to output ratio, but due to friction occurring, the output is slightly lesser than the input.
The final simple machine we used was a wedge. A wedge is just an inclined plane turned on its side. However, a wedge helps you push things apart rather than move an object from a higher or lower level. The narrower a wedge is, the easier it is to push things apart. But to split something very wide, more force has to be applied over a long distance. Our wedges were the two butter knives seen here. Here we have a lever that sends a reindeer into dominoes, which fall over and hit Jenga blocks, which hit books. The books then land on a string, pulling something out of the way for the soccer ball to fall down the ramp and knock over the VHS tapes, which then release the Santa to fall down the inclined plane. The Santa then hits the VHS tapes on the bottom, which knock over like dominoes. At the end, there is a string that is connected to marbles. These marbles then release, falling down the inclined plane, and knock over a binder that pulls another pulley, removing another object out of the way for the marbles to fall into CD cases. These CD cases then knock over into a binder, pulling a string out of the way for a bearing to fall. The bearing then falls down the tubing, hitting paper clips connected to a lever, which make the wedge fall into the cake.
This is the worst Christmas party ever.
Yeah. It stinks.
Guys, I have cake!
As it was our first time even attempting something like this, it was a lot of trial and error. Whilst building, we kept knocking over and shifting little things and accidentally setting the whole machine off. I'm probably the most guilty of this. It was really frustrating, but at the same time was a good way to make sure the machine worked. In the beginning, it was hard to get the reindeer to land on the dominoes because it landed in a different spot each time. To remedy this, we just added a jumble of dominoes that covered a large surface area that ultimately ended up leading to our desired path. The dominoes were difficult to set up and we kept knocking them over. During the actual run, we set them up a little too far apart and some of them didn't set off. The most difficult thing to set up was the marbles in the kitchen. It was hard to balance them and determine which marbles would knock over the binder and CD cases. It was also hard to get the binder to fall the way we wanted. In the end, We made the tinfoil ramp higher to increase the velocity of the marble. We also used a bigger marble to knock the binder backwards.
Things that worked well on our Rube Goldberg involved machines that spanned over a large distance. We had no trouble getting the Santa to fall down the stairs once the VHS tapes released his string. His fall down the plane also resulted in a high velocity, which meant he had enough force to hit the VHS tapes to kickstart their domino effect. The VHS tapes themselves also worked very well. Because of their long length, few spanned a great distance, and it was easy to know if we placed them too far apart, resulting in an easy fix. The lever attached to the wedges used to cut our Christmas cake also worked well. Every time the bearing hit the release clips, the lever was set in motion and cut the cake perfectly.